Now, that was just sort of a bit of an overview and introduction to what leadership is, all right? Now, let's kind of segue into leadership development. And let me share a few myths that hinder leadership development with you. One of those myths is that leaders are born and not made. Well, last week we talked about that, and there's an old saying, of course leaders are born. How else did they get here? So, yes, our circumstances, our genetics, our environment, of course, are important to leadership, but there's also sort of that nurture, that environment, those influences, those things that we do to learn and to grow and develop, that process, if you will, that is all important as well. So are they born? Are they made? Yes. Now, another myth about leadership development is that good leadership is all common sense, right? Yeah, leadership is easy. Why do you need to take a class on it? Why do you need to read a book about it? Just figure it out. It's just kind of common sense, right? Yeah. Well, the thing is that, there's a lot of things that we can learn to improve about leadership by thinking about leadership. Some of the things you're going to encounter in this class, it might not be common sense. In fact, some things about leadership might even be counterintuitive. So we have to move beyond that limiting myth. And then the last one is that the only school you learn leadership from is the school of hard knocks. And this sounds like something your grandpa would say, right? Hey, you just got to get in there and get out there and get bashed around by life, and then you'll learn how to be a leader. Well, I believe that hard knocks do help us, right? Trials, of course, is part of that refining process that God uses in our life. But that's not the only school that we can learn from, right? And let's face it, you can learn some bad habits by your circumstances and by the hard knocks, right? So say for example, you had a high school coach, a football coach, and the way he led you was by, yelling at you and berating at you and, getting you to march around the football field 10 times every day, right? Well, was that effective in that circumstance? Yeah, maybe it was for a bunch of, knucklehead sophomore high school guys. But, is that approach going to work with your volunteers and your leaders, the professionals that you're working with? Can you yell at them and berate them and give them, busy work in order to get them to comply? Yeah, no. So maybe it's a habit you learn, kind of it's a school of thought that you learn, and let's face it, some leaders do that. They sort of emulate other leaders, whether it's a good leadership approach or a bad leadership approach. So again, as you're maturing and you're thinking about leadership, you have to say, was that a good idea? Is that an effective idea? Is that going to work in all situations? Can I treat my volunteers like a bunch of 10th grade sophomore football players, right? So you have to kind of get a little more sophisticated in your approach and know that not one size fits all, and that maybe some of the things that you learned about leadership from a teacher, from a former boss, even from a former pastor, are not really that effective. All right, now we're going to shift gears here and we're going to talk about leadership development proper. Now, what is leadership development? Leadership development is expanding the capacity of members to engage effectively in leadership roles and processes. It is also building the capacity for groups of people to learn their way out of problems that could have not been predicted. All right, so expanding your capacity to engage effectively in leadership process. So in other words, it's helping you to grow as a leader, expanding your repertoire of ideas, of tools, your own ability to address things, right? So it's not just knowing a bunch of things, but it's building your own skill set, your repertoire, your thinking, maybe even your personality, some of these other things we talked about, your personal development, your emotional intelligence, all these kinds of things. And then, of course, we want to look at it in sort of a larger context. So I'm not just speaking to you to help you develop as a leader, but I'm speaking to you as one who is going to help other people develop as a leader as well, right? So you need to think, all right, this is not just for me, but this is for me to help other people to develop as effective leaders as well. So it's building the capacity of the groups to learn to solve problems that couldn't have been predicted, right? So if there was a roadmap, if everything was predictable in life, we could just teach you that and say, all right, here's the 20 things you need to know, and this is going to help you get out of every issue and circumstance, right? But we know that's not reality. We know that that as a leader, what you're really doing on a day-to-day basis is you're facing challenges, right? Management really is about predictability and stability. Leadership is about sort of facing problems and change and unpredictability. So leadership development is that process that helps you to think more complex, to address problems, to solve problems that can't be predicted, right? And that's a pretty tall order. All right, so what are some things that we know about leadership development? In order to develop full leadership potential, we must nurture several things: individual cognitive complexity and critical thinking. Now, what does that mean? It means you got to learn how to think critically, right? Some leaders are very uncritical thinkers, right? They don't really consider like the merits of an argument. They don't really consider other points of view. They're just like, oh, okay, whatever you say. Or it's like my way or the highway, right? So there's, different ways that people can approach the way they think. And so critical thinking is this sort of idea of thinking a little more complexly, deeply, analytically, right? Because not all problems in life are simple, right? You can't, there's an old saying, the man with the hammer, everything is a nail, right? So you got one tool and you're just going to like pound that. Well, not everything is a nail, right? You got to get more than one tool in your toolbox here. And so critical thinking is about opening up your thinking a little more complex, a little more nuance, of understanding arguments, right? And analyzing situations. The next is social intelligence, how people relate to one another and to you as a leader. And again, we know that relationships and social ability and how we interact with people is critical for leadership success, right? So you might have the best idea in the world, you might be the best preacher, the best looking person in the world, but if you can't relate with people as individuals, if they can't relate to you, there's something wrong there. You won't develop as a leader. And so it's part of this social awareness and growth as well. Openness, creativity, challenge, and exploration. Now, this is actually a personality trait. Some people are, by personality, more open to risk, to new things, to new challenges, to new ideas. Other people, by personality, are less open. They are more risk averse. They don't like challenge. They don't like change, right? So we know that people that have this personality trait, that are a little more open, tend to do a little better as a leader. And you might be one of these people who's very risk averse and you don't like change, you don't like challenge. Leadership is going to be a challenge for you, quite honest. And again, we can't necessarily change our personality, but again, this is part of that self-awareness piece, right? Do I have a problem? Do I have a problem with openness and risk and change and challenge? If I do, then leadership is going to be a little bit more difficult for me. I'm not saying give up. I'm just saying be self-aware and know that that's going to be an issue for you. And then there's tolerance for ambiguity, yet staying focused on goals and mission. Now, what does this mean, tolerance for ambiguity? It means a lot of times in leadership, the answer is not always clear. Remember I said earlier that leadership is about tackling problems, right? So a tolerance for ambiguity says, okay, I've got choice A, B, I've got problem A, B, I've got all these decisions to make, but yet I can keep us focused. I can maintain my calm. I can keep the organization focused. I can lead a process of problem solving, of decision making, right? Until the ambiguity becomes a little more clear. Right? So you're rarely going to step, as a leader, you're rarely going to step into a situation where everything is clear, is, defined, situated, everything. It's like, that's the myth, right? One day I'm going to wake up and everything is going to be hunky-dory and it's going to be great and happy. No. If you're a follower, yes, you can resign yourself to going along with the flow. But as a leader, you can't. As a leader, there's always going to be some challenge. There's always going to be some change. There's always going to be some decisions. And so part of leadership development is developing that tolerance for ambiguity. I'm okay with the uncertainness for now because we are focused on mission and task and we're going to work our way through it. And then the last one is self-discipline. Doing what is right without being told to do so. So, we need to have that focus, that self-discipline that says, I'm going to do this regardless of whether somebody tells me to do it or not. If you're waiting for somebody to tell you to do something, you're not really leading. You're a follower at that point. And again, I know everybody, leaders, everybody has somebody above them, right? Even if you're the senior pastor or CEO, you have a board, right? But leadership is about self-discipline, about doing the right things without being told to do so, taking initiative and those sorts of things. All right, let's talk quickly about some things that we know about leadership development. Leadership development that is effective is based on valid ideas about leadership. All right, pause. Now, you're taking a class on leadership right now. You're going to learn some valid ideas about leadership, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, we can inherit bad ideas about leadership, like the guy that had the coach, right, who yelled at him and berated him, right? That's an idea about leadership. It's not necessarily a valid idea about leadership in your context. It's one approach that maybe works there, but we have to be open and understand what are good ideas about leadership. And as you continue to grow and mature as a scholar of leadership, right, and you read and you kind of understand some of these more important ideas, those are valid ideas about leadership, right? So taking those in and kind of discarding those old scripts and those things that we inherited that really aren't valid ideas about leadership. Leadership development that is effective involves individuals receiving feedback from multiple sources. All right, feedback from multiple sources. What does that mean? That means that we are open to the input of other people in our lives. And there's something that's called 360 evaluation or 360 development, this idea of 360 degrees, right? And it's this idea that we receive feedback not only from our supervisor, somebody above us, but we also receive feedback from our peers, and we also receive feedback from our subordinates, i.e. people under us. Now, why is that important? Because if you only receive feedback from like one person above you, they don't see you the same way that this person and these people see you, right? So being open to that feedback, to getting that full, asking our peers how they see us, asking our subordinates how they see us and how effective we are. And again, this isn't easy for some people. Some people, they're a little defensive. They don't want to be open. They're kind of, they're struggling and challenged with that whole self-awareness thing and openness thing and authenticity thing. And so saying, yeah, I'm going to ask my subordinates what they think about me, that's like anathema to them, right? They don't want to do that because they don't want to know what people really think, right? They kind of have their blinders on and they're comfortable in their own little, psychic safety zone. Well, growing as a leader means I'm going to be open to different points of view, right? Sort of like when the prophet came in and spoke to the kings, and the prophet pointed his bony prophet finger and says, "Thus saith the Lord," and the king was like blown away, right? So there was a couple options the king had at that point, right? He could either fall down on his face and repent and weep in sackcloth and ashes and obey the Lord, or he could throw the prophet into the well and into the cellar, lock him up or stone him or kill him, right? So those are kinds of, when truth comes at us, it doesn't really matter where it comes from, if it comes from here or here or here or wherever, right? The prophetic voice of God, we have to be open and we have to learn from that. In order to develop as a leader, we also have to have a concrete development plan. Now, this isn't a plan made out of concrete, but this is rather a real specific kind of a plan that's tangible that we can point to and say, yeah, these are some things that I want to grow in as a leader. Now, one of the goals of this class is to help you to develop a plan like this, and we'll talk more about this later. And then, of course, it involves repeated interventions. Now, part of the whole process approach to leadership development says it's not going to happen in a class, it's not going to happen in a day, it's not going to happen in a seminar, it's not even going to happen in one one amazing encounter with the Lord. As much as we want those, that's part of the process. God uses all these things, right? It involves repeated interventions of constantly rethinking, of growing, of self-awareness, and all these sorts of things, right? Okay, so let's talk about leadership development and practice. Leadership development requires activities that are challenging, provide feedback, and give support. Now, these are all important, right? Challenging, feedback, and support. Okay, so let's think about this. Take this out of you growing as a leader, but you providing opportunities for leadership development for your followers, right? You have to give them things that are challenging, right? So if you have a fairly mature believer, for example, and he comes to you and says, "Hey, Pastor, I want to, get involved." "Oh, sure. Why don't you sweep the floors?" "Oh, yeah. Why don't you help us mow the lawn?" Now you might be thinking, "Yeah, this is great. This will humble him, and yeah, maybe it will, but it's not very challenging, right? So you have to think about where this person is. Am I giving them something that's challenging? Am I constantly rethinking the kinds of assignments that I'm giving to people so that they are challenged? Because guess what? If they are not challenged, they will not grow as a leader. They will plateau, and their leadership skills will plateau as well. So challenging assignments, challenging work, the ability to solve problems, to be involved in the decision-making process, these are all critical for leadership development. And then the feedback, we just talked about that, right? But you need to give people feedback. You need to let them know how they're doing. They need to receive feedback not just from you as the leader or the pastor, but from other people, from their peers and their subordinates. And then, of course, support, right? We don't just throw people off the deep end and say, "Hey, good luck, go for it." People need support. They need encouragement. They need tools. They need skills. They need time to process. They need all these kinds of, what we call scaffolding, right? So you put somebody in a situation where they can learn something about leadership, but you don't just leave them out there by themselves. You kind of provide some scaffolding for them that supports what they're doing, that helps them. And in time, you kind of remove the scaffolding and, remove the training wheels, if you will, and they can go for it. But as you help people develop as leaders, you have to provide that support as well. Now, some of the usual areas of practice focus on things like self-awareness exercises, that is assessments, being comfortable with who you are. And I'm a big fan of taking as many kind of tests as you can, right? So there's things like Myers-Briggs and Strengths Quest, and there's lots of leadership assessments out there. Take them all, learn something from all of them. They're not the gospel, but they're just another piece of self-awareness that's important. 360 multi-source, multi-rater feedback. And I talked about this a little bit, but typically when we try to develop as a leader, we need to get this sort of 360 approach, and you need to give that approach to other people to help them develop as a leader. And then, of course, there's mentoring and coaching relationships. And I think we've all sort of bought into that at this point, right? That we got to have somebody else who can speak into our lives, who can help us grow and develop. We need to have somebody that we give permission to be honest with to us. Because people see things that we don't see, and we need to have those people that we can trust, that that love us, that have our best interest in mind, that we are okay with to being open to, right? So it's important to have somebody like that in your life. Maybe it's just not one person like my mentor, but maybe it's lots of mentors. Maybe it's different people help us in different areas. So it's important to have somebody like that in your life. And then, of course, there's ministry role rotations, stretch assignments, which are appropriately and intentionally challenging, right? So we need new opportunities. We need challenge, and you need to give other people challenge and let them try different things. So if somebody's been doing something for like a year as a volunteer, as a staff member, let them do something else. Give them another opportunity. Let them move into another role in the ministry, if you will, because that's how people grow. That's how they learn, is they kind of try different things, and they find out what they're good at and what they're not good at. It's very important that people move around and try different things. That gives us the opportunity to develop as a leader. So that's about it. I know I covered a lot of ground here, and I went fairly fast, and I appreciate you hanging in with me here. So some of the things that we're going to think about for reflection this week are things like this. How intentional are you in developing your own leadership capacity? How are you helping others to build their leadership capacity? And what can you begin doing that will help you and others to develop their leadership? All right, so we'll chop this up on the discussion board this week, but I just want you to start thinking about it. All right, so hopefully this was helpful to you. We defined leadership. We talked about leadership development. We talked about what it happens to grow and develop as a leader. That's it for this week. God bless you guys. Have fun on the discussion board this week, and I will see you online.